My name is Zara, and for as long as I can remember, my life revolved around Islam. I was raised in a devout Muslim household in Dearborn, Michigan, where faith was not just a part of life but its foundation. From a young age, I was taught the importance of prayer, the discipline of fasting, and the beauty of submitting to Allah's will. My parents were deeply religious, and their greatest hope was that my siblings and I would walk the righteous path, honoring our faith and rejecting anything that strayed from it. I memorized long passages from the Quran, prayed 5 times a day without fail, and did my best to live a life that was pleasing to Allah. Christianity, I was always told, was a corrupted religion, something that had been altered over time and could not be trusted. Jesus, or Isa as we called him, was a prophet and nothing more. That belief was ingrained in me, and I never once questioned it. 4 years, I lived in complete certainty that I was following the right path. I took pride in my devotion, believing that as long as I performed the rituals, followed the rules, and upheld my faith, I would be rewarded in the afterlife. But as I grew older, something inside me felt incomplete. I didn't understand it at first. I was doing everything I was supposed to, yet there was a lingering emptiness I couldn't explain. It wasn't that I lacked faith. I had plenty of it. It was something deeper, something I didn't have words for at the time. But instead of addressing it, I pushed the feeling aside, dismissing it as a temporary phase. I buried myself even further in my faith, believing that if I just prayed harder, fasted more, and devoted myself more fully, the emptiness would go away. Then came the day that changed everything. It started as a simple discomfort, a dull pain in my stomach that wouldn't go away. At first, I thought little of it, assuming it was nothing more than fatigue or something I had eaten. But the pain persisted, growing sharper and more unbearable with each passing day. I tried to endure it, refusing to complain or show weakness. Eventually, my family insisted I see a doctor. When the test results came back, I remember sitting in the sterile white office, my heart pounding as the doctor spoke the words that shattered my world. "You have cancer." Everything around me blurred as the weight of those words sank in. Cancer, a disease I had only ever heard about from distant acquaintances and tragic news stories. Something that happened to other people, never to me. I was young. I was healthy. I had my whole life ahead of me. How could this be real? My mind raced with questions, but deep inside, a quiet fear began to grow. Was this a punishment? Had I done something to anger Allah? Had I not been faithful enough? I couldn't understand why this was happening to me. My family responded the way I expected. They turned to prayer. My mother cried out to Allah every night, begging for His mercy. My father, usually a man of quiet strength, looked broken as he pleaded for my healing. My siblings recited the Quran over me, hoping the sacred words would bring divine intervention. And I did the same. I fell to my knees, pressing my forehead to the ground, and begged Allah to take the sickness away. I fasted even when I was too weak to do so, believing that if I showed enough dedication, I would be healed. The doctor suggested treatments, but my family was hesitant. Allah is the greatest healer, they reminded me, urging me to place my trust in Him alone. Months passed, and instead of getting better, I only grew weaker. The pain became unbearable, draining me of my strength until even the simplest tasks became impossible. My hair thinned, my body wasted away, and I could barely recognize myself in the mirror. The doctors were blunt. If I did not seek medical treatment immediately, I would not survive much longer. My family was divided. Some urged me to fight, to undergo the treatments. Others believed it was in Allah's hands alone. I felt trapped between the fear of going against my faith and the instinct to survive. But beyond the physical suffering, there was something else, something even more terrifying. The emptiness that had always lingered in the back of my mind grew stronger. It was no longer a distant whisper, but a consuming presence. I had always believed that my faith would bring me peace, but in my weakest moments, I felt nothing. No comfort, no assurance, just silence. I told myself that Allah was testing me, that I had to be patient. But deep down, I was beginning to feel abandoned. I had done everything right. I had been faithful. So why did I feel so alone? As the days dragged on, I found myself questioning things I had never dared to question before. What if my entire life had been spent believing in something that wasn't true? What if there was something more, something I had been blind to all along. These thoughts terrified me. They felt like betrayal, but I couldn't shake them. Every time I closed my eyes, the questions returned, whispering in the darkest corners of my mind. And then the night came when my body finally gave out. If you're watching this right now, we have a special message for everyone who comments their name and their city. And if you want to be part of our next video, to have your name shared with thousands and receive a special greeting, leave your name, your city, and give this video a like. Imagine the joy of being mentioned, of sharing your story with a loving community. Don't miss your chance for a moment of recognition, filled with care and light. As the weeks passed following my diagnosis, life became a blur of uncertainty and pain. The cancer was aggressive, and each day felt like I was slipping further away from the life I had once known. My body, once strong and full of energy, became a shell of what it used to be. Every breath was a struggle, every movement an effort, and yet I clung to the faith I had known since childhood. I believed that Allah was testing me, refining me through suffering. That was what I had been taught. That trials were a sign of favor, that the pain was a pathway to greater reward. I prayed with fervor, sometimes until my voice broke, reciting verses from the Quran through gritted teeth, tears streaming down my face. My mother's voice echoed in my ears daily, her prayers and supplications rising to the heavens, begging for mercy. Despite the devotion, despite the relentless faith of my family, my condition worsened. The treatments the doctors offered became points of contention. Some in my family saw them as interference in Allah's will, while others urged me to fight with all means possible. I was caught in the middle, torn between obedience to faith and the instinctive desire to survive. But deeper than the physical battle, a spiritual unrest began to grow within me. I had always felt a distance, an emptiness, but now it became unbearable. Where was the peace I was promised? Where was the comfort I had sought through years of devotion? I cried out to Allah, but the silence was deafening. Then one night, lying alone in my hospital bed, I felt it, the end drawing near. My chest burned with each breath, and I knew I wouldn't last much longer. The room faded around me, the voices of nurses and the hum of machines dissolving into a distant echo. My eyes closed, and I felt myself slipping. But death did not come as I had expected. There was no void, no blackness, no terrifying judgment. Instead, there was light, a light so pure, so warm, that it drew me in like a familiar embrace. I was no longer in my body. I could see it from above, surrounded by my family, who wept and prayed. Yet I felt no fear, only peace. And then I heard it, a voice calling my name, not with judgment or anger, but with love. My heart trembled. I knew that voice, not from the teachings I had grown up with, but from somewhere deeper, somewhere eternal. It was him, Jesus. When I crossed from life to death, I expected terror. I expected judgment. I expected to be met by something cold, distant, and unfamiliar. But what I encountered was the complete opposite. It was as if every weight I had ever carried, fear, doubt, sorrow, was suddenly lifted in a single breath I no longer needed to take. The light before me grew brighter, not just illuminating the space around me, but reaching deep into my very being. It was pure, radiant, and alive. I felt it, not on my skin, but in my soul. Every fiber of who I was responded to it, drawn to its warmth like a long-lost child returning home. And from that light, a figure began to emerge, tall, clothed in brilliant white, his face unlike any I had ever seen, and yet I knew. It was Jesus. The realization hit me like a wave, crashing over everything I thought I understood. For years I had believed he was just a prophet, a man of wisdom and miracles, but nothing more. That belief had defined my life, shaped my faith, determined how I saw the world and myself. And now, standing in front of him, I knew it was all wrong. This wasn't just a prophet. This was the Son of God. I dropped to my knees, not because I was forced to, but because I couldn't stand in the presence of such glory. My soul trembled. There was no fear, no shame, just awe. His eyes locked with mine, eyes that saw everything I had ever been and loved me still. I felt completely known. Every hidden thought, every doubt I had buried, every prayer I had whispered into the silence of my nights. He had heard them all. Then he spoke, and his voice was not just sound, it was truth itself. "Zara," he said, my name like a melody that resonated through my soul. I have always known you. Tears welled up, though I had no body to cry with. The weight of his love undid me. It wasn't earned. It wasn't deserved. It simply was. And in that moment, I understood what I had never grasped before, grace. He reached out his hand, and when I took it, visions began to unfold before me. Not just scenes, but truths, realities that had existed long before I had been born. I saw my own life laid bare, not with condemnation, but with clarity. Moments I had forgotten or dismissed came rushing back with a new depth of meaning. Times when I had felt a strange stirring in my heart, when I had heard someone speak of Jesus and felt something I couldn't explain. They had not been accidents. They had been invitations, gentle calls from the one who loved me before I even knew his name. And I had ignored them all. The realization broke me. I had spent years striving, trying to earn favor, trying to be good enough. I had followed every rule, obeyed every command, hoping to prove myself worthy. And yet, all along, what I truly longed for wasn't something I could achieve. It was something that had already been offered, freely, fully through Jesus. Why? I asked, my voice small, trembling. Why would you come for me? I denied you. I rejected you. His gaze didn't waver. Because I love you. With those words, I understood the cross, not as a symbol, not as a religious artifact, but as the ultimate act of love. He had carried the weight of the world's sin, including mine, not out of obligation, but out of love. He had died not to condemn, but to save, to rescue, to restore. The light around us pulsed with power, and in it I felt the beating heart of the universe, the very presence of God himself. It wasn't cold or distant. It was near, closer than breath, and it was love. He held my hand tighter, and I could feel strength flooding into me, not just physical strength, but spiritual. My heart swelled with peace, with joy, with a purpose I had never known. He looked at me with eyes that held eternity. You have seen the truth, he said softly, and now you must tell them. A mission, a calling, not just to believe, but to share. To tell the world that they didn't have to earn love. They didn't have to live in fear. That salvation wasn't distant or unattainable. It was here. It was now. It was him. I nodded, my soul trembling with both the weight and wonder of what lay ahead. He smiled, the light around him blazing with glory, and then everything began to fade. But the love remained. The news of my conversion spread quickly. Whispers began within our community, quiet at first, then louder, insistent. What had once been a close-knit circle of neighbors, friends, and extended family now became a source of suspicion and scorn. Eyes that once greeted me with warmth now narrowed with judgment. Doors that were always open now remained shut. I had crossed a line, one that could never be uncrossed. I had not merely accepted Jesus, I had confessed him. I had made a public declaration, and with that came consequences. My family, already strained and confused by my healing, now faced the unbearable shame of my betrayal. To them, I was no longer Zara, the daughter, the sister, the devoted Muslim they had raised, but an apostate. A disgrace. One morning, just days after my baptism, my father sat me down in the living room. His face was hard, his eyes colder than I had ever seen them. My mother sat nearby, clutching a string of prayer beads, her gaze fixed on the floor. This must end, he said. You must renounce this blasphemy. You must repent. I stared at him, heart pounding, hands trembling. I can't, I said softly. I won't. Jesus saved me. He healed me. He is the truth. My mother gasped. My father stood abruptly, his face red with fury. Then you are no longer my daughter. The words hit me like a blow. I felt the air leave my lungs, the room spinning. My mother's sobs filled the silence, but I couldn't speak. I couldn't beg. I couldn't plead, because I knew this was the cost. I was asked to leave the house that night. There was no shouting, no violence, just a cold dismissal. I packed a small bag, my hands shaking as I folded the few clothes I could take. As I left, my mother turned away, unable to look at me. My father didn't speak another word. My siblings stayed hidden behind closed doors. I walked into the night with nowhere to go, the weight of rejection pressing down on me like a heavy shroud. But in the deepest sorrow, I felt something else, peace. A peace that had carried me, since the moment I met Jesus. A peace that didn't depend on my circumstances, my family, or my future. It was His presence, still with me. I found refuge with a kind family from the church I had visited. They took me in, not with questions or suspicion, but with love. They listened to my story, prayed with me, and gave me a place to rest. For the first time since leaving home, I felt safe. But the journey was far from over. I began to speak at gatherings, small at first, then larger. My testimony spread, reaching people I had never met. Some came with curiosity, others with hostility. I received messages filled with anger, threats even, from those who believed I had betrayed them. But I also received messages of hope, Muslims who were questioning, seeking, wondering if what I said could be true. One message came from a young woman named Layla. "I felt the same emptiness," she wrote. "I've done everything right, but I feel so far from God. What you said, it's the first time I've felt hope." Her words pierced me. This was why I had been sent back. This was why I had to endure the pain, the loss. Because there were others, just like me, lost in rituals, striving, searching, and Jesus was calling them too. But even as I found purpose, I struggled. I missed my family deeply. There were nights I lay awake, tears soaking my pillow, wondering if they would ever forgive me, if I would ever be welcomed back, not to my house, but to their hearts. I prayed for them constantly, not just for reconciliation, but for revelation. I asked Jesus to show them what He had shown me, to call them by name, as He had called me. And then, one evening, the unexpected happened. My youngest brother, Amir, reached out. His message was simple. "I don't understand what happened to you, but I know you're not the same. You have peace. I see it. Can we talk?" Tears filled my eyes as I read his words. A crack in the wall. A glimpse of hope. We met in a park, away from the eyes and ears of others. He was nervous, guarded, but curious. I shared my story again. Not with urgency, not with pressure, but with truth and love. I told him what I had seen, how Jesus had met me, how He had healed not just my body, but my soul. Amir listened, really listened. "I don't know what to think," he admitted. "But you're different. You're at peace. I want that." I didn't push him. I just smiled, placing a hand on his arm. "Jesus is calling you too, Amir. Just listen." As we parted, I felt something shift. A seed planted, a door cracked open. Not all would believe, not all would accept, but some would. And for them, I would keep speaking. If you've stayed with me through this journey, I want to know who you are. Leave your name and your city in the comments. I'll be sending a special message to some of you in our next video as a way to celebrate the community we're building together. Let's be a light to the world, united in truth and love. The weeks that followed were a mix of trials and triumphs. Every day I woke up with a fire in my heart, knowing I had been called for a purpose. But the weight of that calling was not light. I was walking a narrow path, one that demanded courage, sacrifice, and unwavering faith. There were moments I wanted to give up. Moments when the rejection from my family, the isolation, and the fear of what the future held became almost too much to bear. But in those moments, I remembered the face of Jesus. I remembered His voice, His love, His promise. "You will not do this alone." Those words echoed within me every time I felt weak. And true to His word, I never was alone. The people God placed in my life during this time became my new family. Brothers and sisters in Christ who walked beside me, prayed with me, encouraged me, and reminded me daily of His grace. Together, we began to reach others. We held small gatherings in homes, parks, anywhere people were willing to listen. I shared my testimony again and again, each time with the same fervor, the same urgency. And each time, I saw hearts open, eyes widen, souls stirred. One night, after sharing at a small event, a man approached me, his eyes filled with tears. "I am a Muslim," he said quietly. "But what you said, I feel something I have never felt before. Can Jesus truly love me too?" I took his hands in mine and answered, without hesitation, "He already does." These encounters gave me strength. They reminded me that this mission was not about numbers, not about recognition, but about souls. About leading people to the truth I had once been blind to. About shining a light into the darkness. And even as the world around us grew colder, more hostile, I saw that light spreading. People from all backgrounds were encountering Jesus, experiencing his love and finding freedom. There was a movement growing, not one of fear or force, but of love, truth, and transformation. But Jesus had warned me the enemy would not rest. And soon, I would face a test that would challenge everything I believed. If this message has touched you, if you feel a stirring in your heart, I invite you to like this video and leave your name and city in the comments. I want to greet some of you personally in the next video. Your moment to shine, your 60 seconds of light for the world to see. Together, we are building something special, something eternal. It was a quiet morning when I received the message that my father was ill. The man who had cast me out, who had refused to speak my name, now lay in a hospital bed, weakened and frail. My heart was torn. I wanted to rush to him, to sit by his side. But would he even let me? After much prayer, I went. Walking into that sterile room, I felt a wave of memories. My childhood, his strong hands teaching me, his voice calling me to prayer. And now, he lay silent, barely able to open his eyes. My mother sat beside him, her face aged with sorrow. She looked at me. He asked for you. I approached, kneeling by his bedside, taking his hand. He looked at me, and for the first time in a long time, his eyes were not filled with anger, but with something else. Fear, pain, regret. "Sarah," he whispered, "tell me about your Jesus." I choked on my tears. And there, in that sacred moment, I shared the truth once more. Not in debate, not with argument, but with love. I told him how Jesus had saved me, healed me, transformed me. And as I spoke, peace filled the room. I don't know what choice he made in his heart that day, but I know this: the seed was planted, and I trust God to water it. My journey is far from over. There will be more trials, more rejection, but there will also be more miracles, more freedom, more truth. I was once blind, but now I see, and I will never stop speaking the name of Jesus. Thank you for walking this journey with me. If this message has moved you, I invite you to keep watching. Click on the video now appearing on your screen. It may be the most powerful message you'll ever hear.